You've only been married a month and she already wants to move into my house. I snapped at my son, David. He calmly swallowed his bite of sandwich and met my gaze without a hint of guilt. We decided you'll stay in the guest room, Mom. Our lease is up and we need the master bedroom. Don't make a drama out of this. Sarah, his new wife, leaned against the kitchen door frame, casually filing her nails. She offered a thin, expectant smile, clearly waiting for me to break down. She wanted the perfect victim, the weeping mother she could easily step over, to claim her new territory. At 65, I had no intention of playing that role. This house paid off with my own sweat and tears. After my husband passed, belonged entirely to me. The movers arrive tomorrow morning, Sarah announced, blowing dust from her fingernails. You should probably start clearing out your closets today. We have a lot of furniture. I didn't argue. I didn't cry or plead for the respect I had earned. I simply picked up my coffee mug, turned my back on them, and walked to the living room. My heart beat a little faster, but my mind remained perfectly ice cold. If they wanted to play house and pretend they were the masters of my life, they were stepping onto the wrong battlefield. For years, I had made the mistake of smoothing out every bump in David's path. I paid his phone bill, covered his car insurance, and kept the fridge stocked with his favorite foods. I thought I was being a good mother. I was actually just raising a man who thought the world owed him a master suite. Sitting in my armchair, I listened to them murmuring in the kitchen, already planning where they would put their modern rug. I pulled out my tablet. They wanted to take over. I decided it was time to let them pay the admission fee. The next morning, I didn't pack a single sweater. Instead, I sat at the kitchen island with my espresso, watching the movers lug heavy boxes through my front door. I logged into my banking app. With a few swift taps, I canceled David's auto insurance policy, removed him from my family cell phone plan, and froze the backup credit card I had foolishly let him keep for emergencies, the same card Sarah had just used to order premium silk sheets. By noon, the house was a maze of cardboard. Sarah marched into the kitchen carrying a stack of my heavy cast-iron pans and artisanal ceramic plates. She dumped them unceremoniously into a black garbage bag. Your things are very outdated, Zoe, she declared, unboxing a set of flimsy, minimalist plastic plates. I'm donating these. David said you wouldn't mind a more modern aesthetic. I took a slow sip of my coffee. My things stay exactly where they are, Sarah. David appeared behind her, looking exhausted from carrying boxes. Mom, please just cooperate. Don't make this difficult. Standing up, I walked right between them. It's very simple, David. The old guest room and your childhood room are completely empty. Take your pick. But my bedroom remains mine. I left them standing in the kitchen, surrounded by their expensive clutter, slowly realizing my boundaries were not negotiable. Since I refused to budge, they had to shove their massive, king-sized bed and vanity into David's tiny, old room. Later that afternoon, I called a locksmith. Within an hour, my large walk-in pantry had a high-security deadbolt. I quietly moved my coffee maker, my ceramics, my cast-iron pans, and every ounce of my groceries inside. I left the main kitchen cabinets completely bare. That evening, I heard Sarah slam a plastic plate onto the counter. David, she yelled from the kitchen. Where is the food? And why is the pantry locked? I turned the page of my book, smiling. The games had just begun. The real weight of adulthood crashed down on David's shoulders the following Wednesday. I was out front watering the hydrangeas when he stormed out the front door. He was pale, pressing his cell phone tight against his ear. What do you mean, declined? Try it again. I need to drive to work, he shouted into the receiver. He paced across the lawn, crushing the freshly cut grass. No, don't suspend it. He hung up, staring at me wildly from the porch. Striding over, he demanded, Mom, what did you do to my car insurance? The agent says the primary card rejected the charge, and I had to use the neighbor's Wi-Fi to make the call. Because my phone has no data, I methodically turned the brass knob on the hose, shutting off the water. Wiping my hands on my apron, I looked him in the eye. "I didn't do anything to your insurance, David. I simply stopped paying for it. I removed my card from your accounts." "Why would you do that without telling me?" He raised his voice, his face flushing red. Hearing the commotion, Sarah stepped out onto the porch, clutching her silk robe tightly around her waist. "Because you are a married man," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "You took a wife and decided to establish your own household. Even if you choose to do it under my roof, grown men pay their own bills." I assumed that was obvious. "I have to go to work." "I'm uninsured," he panicked, running his hands through his hair. "Then log into your bank and pay it with your own money," I offered. Sarah crossed her arms, glaring at me. "This is a low blow, Zoe. You know we are saving up. David said you always handled these little expenses. Help is freely given when it is respected." "Sarah," I countered, locking eyes with her, "not when it is demanded. Welcome to marriage." I walked past them, leaving them in the damp grass. By Friday, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Knowing David now had to divert his discretionary income toward actual living expenses gave me a quiet sense of satisfaction. Sarah, however, was not the type of woman to tolerate financial restrictions gracefully. I spent the morning at the farmer's market, enjoying the crisp air and fresh produce, deliberately staying away from their sour moods. When I returned carrying canvas bags full of apples and fresh bread, I noticed the hallway felt different. The door to my master bedroom, which I always kept locked, was wide open. I dropped my bags on the kitchen counter and walked down the hall. My breath hitched. My hand-stitched quilt was gone. My antique nightstands had vanished. In the corner, Sarah was cheerfully dusting a sleek, gray, modern dresser that David must have hauled upstairs while I was out. Right outside the door, blocking the hallway, were 4 large black garbage bags. Inside them, carelessly shoved together, were my clothes, my framed photographs, and my reading lamps. Sarah noticed me standing there. She didn't flinch. It was time, Zoe. David and I were suffocating in that shoebox. This is the natural order of things. The new generation needs the main space. David agreed. A sharp pang of disappointment hit my chest. Not for the furniture, but for my son's cowardly betrayal. He was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in the garage to avoid the confrontation. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a fit. I silently grabbed the heavy garbage bags and dragged them into the guest room, shutting the door firmly behind me. I sat on the edge of the twin bed. The humiliation tried to crawl up my throat, but I forced it down, transforming it into pure strategy. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a familiar contact. "Bill, it's Zoe Freeman," I greeted. "Remember that major remodel we discussed last year? The one requiring total demolition of the master bath and kitchen. I want to start tomorrow at 6 a.m. I'll pay double for the weekend rush." At exactly 6:00 a.m. on Saturday, the deafening roar of a concrete sledgehammer rattled the foundation of my house. I was comfortably settled in the guest room, sipping chamomile tea made with the electric kettle I kept on my new desk. Snug in my ears were heavy-duty silicone earplugs that reduced the mechanical violence outside to a dull, rhythmic thud. Upstairs, the panic was immediate. Through the walls, I could hear muffled shrieks. I stepped out into the hallway just in time to see David and Sarah sprinting out of the master bedroom, coughing wildly. They were covered in a fine layer of white drywall dust. Bill, a massive man with a tool belt and a hard hat, had used the spare key I provided. His crew of 3 had marched straight upstairs, bypassing the sleeping couple, and begun smashing the tile wall that separated the master bathroom from the walk-in closet. "What is going on?" Sarah shrieked, batting the air in front of her face. Her expensive silk pajamas were coated in gray powder. Bill poked his head out through the dust cloud, casually chewing a piece of gum. "Mornin'. Deep Demolition Day. Watch your toes. A power drill immediately drowned out Sarah's response. David scrambled down the stairs, his eyes wide, hunting for me. He found me standing calmly near the kitchen where two more workers were currently ripping the upper cabinets off the wall with crowbars. Mom, what kind of insanity is this? Men are tearing the house apart, he yelled over the noise. I pulled out one earplug and offered a warm smile. It's preventative maintenance, sweetie. I've wanted to update those old pipes in the master suite for years. When Sarah decided to empty the space for me, it really inspired me to finally pull the trigger. But we're sleeping in there. We don't have a kitchen. David choked out as a worker, hauled the stainless steel sink out the back door. Oh, I know. Remodels are so inconvenient. I sighed dramatically. It should only take about 5 weeks. The next 3 days turned the house into a literal war zone. Thick cardboard lined the hardwood floors, and a permanent haze of gray dust hung in the air. The relentless screech of circular saws and the thud of hammers echoed from sunrise to sunset. David and Sarah couldn't use the master bedroom during the day because Bill's crew treated it as their personal staging ground. Despite the plastic sheeting, cement dust found its way into Sarah's designer shoes and David's work suits. Without a functional kitchen, they were forced to order takeout for every meal. Combined with his new insurance and phone bills, David's bank account was bleeding out. I, on the other hand, lived in a pristine oasis. I had sealed the edges of my guest room door with thick painter's tape. Inside, I had my electric grill, my mini fridge, and exclusive access to the only working full bathroom in the house. I spent my afternoons reading in the park or visiting friends entirely unaffected by the chaos. On Tuesday night, I overheard them fighting in the living room. I can't even take a shower, Sarah sobbed, slapping a dusty throw pillow. The downstairs half bath has no tub, and your mother keeps her door locked. I had to wash my hair in the sink with freezing water. What do you want me to do? David had fired back, sounding completely broken. It's her house. She hired the contractors. Tell her to stop. My clothes are ruined. This place is uninhabitable. I stepped out of my room wearing a fresh robe smelling faintly of lavender soap. I leaned over the upstairs banister. Just a heads up, I announced casually. Bill is tearing out the main water line tomorrow. The water will be shut off from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Plan accordingly. Sarah's face crumpled. The arrogant conqueror was gone, replaced by an exhausted, filthy girl. You are a monster, she hissed. No, Sarah, I corrected, descending one step. I am the homeowner. Good night. By Wednesday morning, the breaking point arrived. Sarah refused to go to work. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, wearing a dust-covered tracksuit, waiting for the crew. The moment Bill walked through the front door, carrying a reciprocating saw, she stepped directly into his path. You are not working today, she ordered, attempting to summon the authority she usually reserved for me. As a resident of this house, I demand you pack up your tools and leave. You are destroying my furniture. Bill, a veteran contractor who had survived 3 decades of family disputes and divorces, didn't even blink. He adjusted his tool belt, looked down at her, and blew a bubble with his gum. Look, lady, I don't know who you are, Bill rumbled. I have a signed contract with Zoe. She signs my checks. If she tells me to rip up that floorboard, I rip it up. Excuse me. His crew smoothly walked around her, unrolling thick orange extension cords across her expensive new rug. Sarah's face flushed crimson. She spun around and charged toward the stairs, catching me as I descended. I was dressed in a crisp blouse, holding my car keys, ready for a brunch date. Tell them to get out, she screamed. You have no right to treat us like animals. I paused, looking her up and down. She was trembling and entirely out of control. You chose to invade my home. Sarah, I stated, keeping my voice low and steady. You packed my belongings in garbage bags and assumed I would just roll over because I'm older. I told you my bedroom was off limits. We are family, she yelled. If you hate the dust, the noise, and the lack of plumbing, the front door works perfectly fine, I replied. No one is holding you hostage. David emerged from the cramped downstairs study, awkwardly holding a wrinkled dress shirt. He looked from his screaming wife to the burly contractors and finally to me. The dark circles under his eyes were prominent. Mom, please, he begged, his shoulders slumping. Just call off the remodel. We'll give you the room back. We'll do whatever you want. I can't take this anymore. I'm exhausted, and I have a huge presentation today. I looked at my son. There was no real malice in him, just a profound, crippling weakness. He had allowed his wife to bulldoze his mother, expecting me to absorb the impact to keep the peace. The remodel continues, David, I answered simply. The house needed it. You both wanted a modern space, didn't you? This is the process. But we have no money left, he admitted, his voice cracking. The takeout, the bills. I can't afford to fix this. That sounds like a budgeting issue, I noted, adjusting my purse strap. You need to figure out where you stand as a man, David. Because right now, you are standing in a construction zone you cannot afford to fix, demanding privileges you haven't earned. I turned my back on them, walked out the front door, and headed to my car. Behind me, the roar of the power saw ripped through the house once again. I spent the day at a museum, treating myself to a nice lunch, taking my time. I didn't check my phone once. When I finally pulled into my driveway around 5 p.m., the heavy machinery was quiet. Bill was in the front yard, tossing scrap wood into a dumpster. Good day, Bill, I asked, handing him an envelope with his weekly payment. Very productive, Zoe, he chuckled, pocketing the envelope. Might want to check the hallway, though. Looks like a change in the weather. I walked up the porch steps, feeling a strange, hollow quietness inside the house. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was thick with settling dust, but the frantic energy of the past week was gone. I walked toward the staircase just as David bumped a large, heavy suitcase down the final step. He was sweating, his posture defeated, refusing to make eye contact with me. Behind him, Sarah dragged her designer luggage, the fabric permanently smeared with white drywall paste. Her eyes were red, whether from crying the dust or pure fury, I couldn't tell, and I didn't care. We're leaving, David muttered, dropping the handle of his bag to catch his breath. We booked a cheap motel for a few nights. We're going to look for an apartment to rent. That seems like a very sensible decision, I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. Sarah froze at the bottom of the stairs. She glared at me, her jaw tight, desperate to deliver one final crushing insult to salvage her shattered pride. She opened her mouth, taking a deep breath to yell. Instead, she inhaled a lungful of lingering cement dust. She bent over, hacking into a violent, dry cough that completely destroyed whatever dramatic exit she had planned. This isn't over, she managed to wheeze out. Of course it's not, I smiled pleasantly. We still have to install the new tile and the vanity. It's going to be gorgeous. David grabbed Sarah by the elbow, practically dragging her toward the door. He was broken by the reality of having to financially support a demanding wife without the invisible safety net I had always provided. He opened the door and they stepped out into the fading afternoon light. There was no screaming, no cinematic door slam, just the dull rumble of suitcase wheels rolling down my concrete driveway. I locked the deadbolt, leaned against the wood, and breathed in the smell of fresh lumber. My house was a disaster, but it was mine again. A month later, the dust had completely settled. Bill finished the work a week ahead of schedule. My old bedroom now featured a brilliant, naturally lit master bath with premium finishes, and my kitchen was an absolute dream. I unpacked my cast iron pans and arranged them perfectly on the new counters. One Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was in the backyard repotting my begonias. I hadn't changed the locks out of spite. I changed them for security. But David had learned his lesson. He stood on the porch, waiting patiently. He looked thinner, wearing a shirt he clearly hadn't ironed well. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly as I opened the door. "Hello, David. Come on in." He sat at the kitchen island, tracing the marble countertop with his finger. "The house looks amazing," he admitted. "Sarah and we rented a small place downtown. She hates it, but it's what I can actually afford now that I'm paying all the bills." I nodded, wiping soil from my gardening gloves. I felt no urge to offer him a check or pity. That chapter of my motherhood was closed. Independence is expensive, but it's a great teacher. "Mom, I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I was an idiot. I let her take over, and I forgot that you worked your whole life for this place." I looked at him. I loved my son. But I finally saw him clearly. "I accept your apology, David. But things are different now. You are welcome to visit for Sunday dinners, but you call first. And in this house, my rules apply." He nodded slowly. There were no dramatic hugs, no tearful resets. We didn't need them. I didn't need his presence to feel whole. I made a cup of espresso, enjoying the perfect, absolute silence of my home. Setting boundaries isn't about punishing people. It's about surviving them. I finally knew exactly where I stood, and nobody would ever push me out of my space again. Looking back, the biggest takeaway from all of this wasn't about outsmarting my daughter-in-law or punishing my son. It was simply about remembering my own worth. For so long, I thought being a good mother meant making myself smaller so my kids could take up more space. But the truth is, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Protecting your peace, your finances, and your boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary survival. We spend our whole lives working hard to build our safe spaces, and getting older doesn't mean we have to shrink into the background and hand over the keys. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your grown children is to let them face the real world on their own dime. Have you ever had to draw a hard boundary with family to protect your own sanity? I would love to hear your experiences. So please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story or found it relatable, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.